Good morning, everyone. Joshua Severe Weather. Happy weekend to you. Well, it is June, and that means two things. Number one, it's meteorological summer, but number two, it is the beginning of what is expected to be a very active Atlantic hurricane season. Day one of 180 days to go here. And we continue to look at some very warm waters in the tropics and what could be a very active season and very potentially destructive season, depending on where storms hit. And I'm going to share kind of what things look like here in the coming weeks here as we track the tropics. So here's a look at the season I am predicting. And yes, I'm on the higher end of things, but I've been doing this for a while. 30 named storms, that would put us pretty much up at the top. Hurricane 16, major 7. The ACE stands for uh, accumulating cyclone energy. There we go. And 250 is well above the average, almost twice what we typically see in an Atlantic season. Last year, we had a lot of storms, but the ACE was a lot lower, a lot of maybe lower end storms. We finally got some things going towards September, but not as active a season due to the El Nino. This year, we're switching to a La Nina, which favors more activity in the tropics. Storms that do get into the warmest waters of the tropics have a good chance of becoming hurricanes. I do think we're going to see some major hurricanes across this region. So those of you on the Gulf Coast, in Florida, in the Caribbean, obviously need to be watching. Here's what other entities are forecasting. So I'm at about 30, and you'll see I'm kind of at the higher end of things, but most folks are averaging about 24 named storms. The average is 14, and that average has been climbing as we identify more storms with newer technology. Here's a look at the name list here of storms we're expecting, and I extended it into the bonus list here after William into Adria, Braylon, Caridad, Deshaun, Emery, Foster, Gemma, Heath, and Isla. All the storms on the list up until then we've seen before for the most part. We haven't really gotten to Raphael or Sarah or Tony yet, but I do think this season we do get to that. Across the globe, temperatures have been running above the seasonal average. The average has climbed some. A lot of this is due to natural cycles of the earth. We've seen a lot of geothermal activity, and that has warmed the waters. There's probably been some human element to it. I just don't study it enough to be able to give you that kind of certainty. I can't just say, oh, wow, we're ruining the earth. But there's definitely warmer than average temperatures worldwide. Now, these vary quite a bit. And do keep in mind, by the way, if the polar regions warm, ice will melt, and that will actually cool things down farther downstream. So there is going to be some balance that comes out of this, but we may not be around long enough to even see that happen. So everything's a theory at this point, in my opinion. But regardless, I will talk about what we can control, and that is how prepared we can be. We can't control anything else. The first thing I want to bring up is the Nino index. We were in a La Nina for 3 straight summers, and then last year went to an El Nino, a fairly high El Nino, but not the strongest El Ninos of the world. And then by the time we got to April, we started to see the El Nino fade. And as we got into May, the value has dropped down to 0, which is a neutral phase. El Nino is positive, La Nina is negative. These measure temperatures of the equatorial Pacific. And typically when they are cooler than average and a La Nina takes over, we have lower amounts of wind shear on the Atlantic side and more favorable conditions for storms to survive wind shear. Couple that with warmer waters, and conditions are certainly going to be more favorable than we have seen. Right now, we're about 0.2 of a degree below average Celsius. However, that number is expected to drop as we get later into the summer. And there's a chance we could get into a moderate or even strong La Nina by the time we get to the second half of the Atlantic season. This is the climate forecast system. It shows we are heading towards a La Nina by July. And then the question mark, of course, is going to be how strong will that be? And if you take the average of things, 1 to 1.5 degrees below average would be a moderate La Nina, potentially even stronger La Nina. The stronger it gets, in theory, the more active the hurricane season is going to be. But I've seen seasons where we've been more on the neutral side. Look at 2020, for example, or even 2005. Where that doesn't necessarily have to be a condition to get storms to be very active. The other thing we're watching are Atlantic tropical temperature anomalies. This is where we stand versus the average. And right now, the entire Atlantic main development region is continuing to run above average. We have seen the water temperature stop warming overall, but they're still very warm. 6 to 7 tenths of a degree Celsius above the norm. They've been around a degree above the norm, meaning that they're not going to be cooling off anytime soon. That's with respect to average. The central Atlantic maybe is the reason I think we see more storms surviving farther north, 25 north to 45 north. So that's about the latitude of Miami, Florida, up to about Boston and Maine, New England. And you'll see over the last few weeks, the subtropics have actually warmed up significantly, meaning storms that go farther north are going to have some warmer water to play with, if you want to call it that. And the Gulf of Mexico has always been a concern of mine. It's been running hot for several months, but it continues to warm. And right now, the average of the Gulf temperatures is over a degree Celsius, so over 2 degrees Fahrenheit above the typical average. These waters typically peak in warmth by September. That's the peak of our hurricane season, August or September. Our temperatures in the Gulf right now are pretty close to where they should be at that time of the year. The atmospheric conditions are not, but the ocean temperatures are. So that obviously is of concern to a lot of us in the weather world. Here's a look at the world, and you can see the red side of the Atlantic above average, then the cold side being the equatorial Pacific, and especially the southern Pacific. And you can kind of see here these warmer waters stretching from near Japan over the northern Pacific. This is actually a warm tropical current, and you can see it's bringing above average temperatures. Now, a lot of that is from what's going on well underneath the ocean, that geothermal activity. You can see that warmer water is actually being driven eastward across the North Pacific, not all the way up into the colder current here off of Russia and off of Alaska, but this warmer current that goes along about 40 degrees north. And that is going to come into play this season as well, as it continues to help fuel La Nina. We get areas where you have one extreme or the other. It's not just a flat everybody's average. That's not how this works. So that's what we're going to be tracking for you guys in the tropics. On the Atlantic side, you can see the warmest waters with respect to average are off the Mexican coast. It's just been an extremely hot spring and early summer over southern Mexico, maybe even a record one. I don't know how long records go down there, but very hot for those folks. The Gulf is very warm. We do have some cooling near the Yucatan. I don't think that is going to come into too much play here, but look how warm it is off of Florida already, off the Bahamas, off of Cuba. Generally speaking, we have places that are hitting 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the warm water gets pretty deep as well. If you look at this ocean heat content from the University of Miami, you can see it's not just at the surface, but well below the surface, a lot of content in place. So storms that form here in optimal conditions do have a chance to intensify very quickly, more so than what we've seen in recent years. Not so much over the main development region, but storms here do have some fuel to tap into. But the areas of greatest concern are going to be the Western Caribbean and the Eastern Gulf, and in the waters near the Bahamas and over the current here off the Florida coast. This is, sorry, I messed these up. So the graphic I showed you were actually anomalies with respect to average, and off the charts anomalies. This is the actual oceanic heat content. Again, the two go together, but this is the raw values, and this is where we are with respect to average. So much above average across areas where our storms are going to be forming this season. Let's look at the world here real quick. Zoom Earth, really neat site here. It is ad supported, but you can see we're not super busy right now. The Atlantic is quiet for the time being. We do have a disturbance south of Guatemala and Mexico. It's got a 10% chance of developing. I don't think it's going to develop at this point. We've seen a few potential opportunities in the Pacific, but right now not looking that way. We do have a system that was a depression, made landfall in China here yesterday, and it is weakening now into a remnant low. Heavy rain expected in places like Hong Kong and Guangzhou, but this is not going to develop any further. You can see India has cleared out. We're actually in a massive heat wave across India. Early summer is when those happen. When the monsoon season kicks up later in June and July, India cools down, but it gets more humid and we see more cyclonic activity. There's an area to watch here in the South Pacific, but it is nowhere near any kind of major landmass, and the chance for development is low. And then other than that, we do have the remains of what was a typhoon here, now moving towards the Bering Strait and the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, but nothing tropical at that point. Looking at the Atlantic, one massive cyclone here near the Azores. It is not tropical. It's not moving anywhere. And then a big trough moving through the Western Atlantic coming off of Atlantic Canada. This is what's been responsible for the cooler temperatures. It was 49 this morning here in Raleigh. I was pretty happy with that. You can see there's some flare-ups here off the Pacific side of Mexico and over the Western Caribbean. But with a lot of troughing here and a lot of wind shear, we're not going to see any kind of development. There are several tropical waves to track right now, and it's always good to track waves. We typically don't see as many this early in the season, but with the warm waters, there's more potential for that. So here's a wave. Here's a wave here. There's another wave in South America. And then our last wave is in the gyre here, moving through Central America, and that's what has that 10% chance of developing. But massive trough right here, which provided all the severe weather that we saw last week. That's off the coast, so it's cool and dry and stable here. It is picking up moisture from the Caribbean and taking it up east of Bermuda, but that wind shear is strong, so I don't think we're going to see anything forming in here. Then we've got this massive circulation just west of the Azores here in the Northeast Atlantic, and a trough that digs all the way down into the Caribbean. That's shutting things off here. All these waves that come underneath this get too far low in latitude to develop. Where they need to be is in here, but the wind shear in here is too strong for that to happen. So some good news for the time being. It is only the first day of the month of June, by the way. We've got 6 months to go, so I don't think it's going to last this way forever. Here's the Gulf. Thunderstorm complex over the Florida Panhandle. This is what hit Houston this time yesterday morning. And then you could see very fast flow from west to east here, keeping the Gulf quiet from any tropical mischief. Here's the Caribbean, and again, a flare-up east of Nicaragua with wind shear, with some sinking aloft. It's probably not going to develop into anything anytime soon, but it will keep things pretty wet here over Central America. We'll also see action over eastern Cuba, Hispaniola, over Jamaica, over the Turks and Caicos, somewhat over Puerto Rico. Eastern Caribbean is looking pretty good for the time being. I don't think that's going to stay that way forever as this moisture comes through the intertropical convergence zone. But overall, things are quiet for now, quieter a little bit longer than I thought about a month ago, but that's okay. Again, 6 months to go. We're not going to celebrate anytime soon until it's all over. Here's a look at the Pacific. And you can see mainly this disturbance here, which does not have any kind of central core of thunderstorm activity. And you can see kind of our death ridge in place here over Mexico. I mean, we're talking, there have been some places here in Osaka that have been hitting 115 degrees every single day. So they could use this rain, although it could cause some flooding. Acapulco's over here. We remember, of course, what happened with Hurricane Otis back in October. It's super hot. There's people here that are rebuilding their homes and don't have the air conditioning. And my prayers and thoughts go out for them because it's just a really difficult situation to be in. It's like pick your poison. Would you rather have no activity, drought, and extreme heat, or would you have major hurricanes forming? You just don't win that. Here's a look at Saharan dust coming through. And I do want to show this to you because Saharan dust leads to stable sinking air. It keeps storms from forming. And you can see it's going to be an issue here coming off of Africa for anything to form. But as we get into about a week or so from now, the amount of dust does begin to decrease. And we see a little bit less stable air in place here. It's still there, but it's definitely on the wane. So this is something that we're going to be watching. The more of this we see, the less likely we'll see storms. But as we go into the second and third weeks of June, you can see it's not super high. So that's a feature we're going to be watching. The other feature is the North Atlantic Oscillation. When it's negative, what it does is it brings sinking air down into the main development region of the tropics. When it's positive, there's more rising air. I'm not going to get into why that is. Feel free to get a meteorology degree and we can chat about it. No, I'm not trying to be a jerk. We don't have all day for that, and this is very technical as it is. But you can see it is going to be negative here as we head into next week and the beginning of the third week of June, and that would not favor any deep tropical activity, but then kind of more neutral around zero here, so could go kind of either way as we get into the second half of June and beginning of July. By the way, that negative NAO is what's going to keep us on the cooler side here over eastern Canada, over eastern North America, over the Great Lakes region. As it goes more neutral, we are going to see the heat that's been in Texas and on the Gulf eventually expand north and eastward. It's just probably going to take us a couple more weeks. This is from this is from Alex Borum's site, cyclonicwx.com. And I want to get this out of the way here. This is going to show you upper level winds here. And I want to just kind of move this along. And you can see Lots of strong westerlies moving through the Gulf of Mexico over the next several days. This is going to keep wind shear awfully high. As we head, though, towards next weekend and the following, you will see that there's more ridging moving into Mexico and the Caribbean. This is going to provide us some better chances to see storms that will start to bubble up across this area. We're going to see more convergence near the surface and more divergence up at 30, 40, 50,000 feet up, meaning storms can start to grow in size. So as we head towards the middle of June, things do start to get more favorable from an upper level wind standpoint. Here's a look at zonal wind anomaly, and basically the bluer, cooler colors indicate more favorable divergence aloft. The red indicates more hostile wind. You can see that as well as we get to about the middle of June, things start getting a little bit more conducive for some development down across the deep tropics. The Gulf isn't there yet, but it is trending in that direction towards the middle of the month of June. And then finally, a look at where rising air is going to be settling into the Pacific and Gulf. And again, this shows the greens moving in to Mexico. So the Pacific will have more favorable conditions first around the 10th of June, and then the Caribbean between the 15th and 25th of June. And it stays pretty favorable into the deep tropics into the beginning of July. But again, this is a 40-day forecast. It is subject to change. The browns indicate hostile environment aloft. Now we start to see more favorable environment as we get to about, this is next week, but really as we get past about the 10th of July, take a look at some of this. You can see that as well. The gyre could get going here, and the Gulf and the Caribbean could see more activity after about the 15th of June. So we got a little bit of time, but not as much as you think. And then it is, of course, showing kind of more uncertainty. You see kind of more neutral colors by mid-July. Here is one final look at the Europeans' forecast showing that the tropical cyclone activity chances are pretty much nil over the Atlantic basin. It does show some action near Central America next week. As we get to the following week, though, things are going to start to bubble up a little bit more over the Caribbean and maybe over the Southern Gulf. Chances are starting to climb. They're not high yet. They're more high across the Pacific, which you would expect until that pulse gets over onto the Atlantic side. But we're starting to see maybe some inklings of some potential development towards the Carolinas here by the second week of the month of June. By the third week, again, not high chances, but you see the trend is starting to increase, that we start to see maybe some more potential development towards the third week of June. And the fourth week of June, the European is now saying we're going to start to see early action, just like we saw last year across the main development region of the tropics. More waves coming off of Africa that have a better chance of surviving. Again, these are 20 to 30% chances. You know, odds don't favor them, but if you've seen that 30% chance for a thunderstorm, you know things can pop. And certainly the trend is going to be the friend of tropical development here. And finally, let's take a look at the next week ahead. You can see it's going to be pretty cloudy over the Caribbean next week, but we don't see anything really spinning up. Then we see some sunnier weather the following week. And then we're going to have to keep an eye on things near the Carolinas around the 15th. We're going to have to keep an eye on the Pacific. Again, don't get too caught up with the GFS model, which spins up a hurricane in 2 weeks. That's going to probably change. But overall, you can see things are starting to come alive here in about 2 weeks or so. We'll look real quick at the U.S. Things are not as busy as last weekend. Thank goodness for that. We do have a severe thunderstorm watch in western Nebraska this morning. Heat building in the west, so we start to have some heat watches here over parts of central California, over the deserts area, as well as Las Vegas. Some flood potential continuing near the Gulf Coast, and very high rivers here over the south central states where it was an extremely wet May. And you can see trough in the east providing one more nice day, but things are going to start shifting eastward into the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and parts of the south as we get into the end of the weekend. So enjoy today while you can. It's going to start changing. We are going to see a big ridge of heat building into the west. In May, we went from near the average at the beginning of the month for tornadoes to well above. We had such an active May. I think it was the second most active May on record. And I think June, things are going to level off, but we are going to still see some severe weather outbreaks. The next few days, that focus is going to be in the plains and in parts of the deep south, maybe Florida as well. A threat for hail, a few tornadoes, and strong winds, mainly hail, though. Going to be damaging here today into tonight over the high plains. Tomorrow, that threat shifts farther northward. It will include the Texas plains, but the better chances extend into the Dakotas, and there could be maybe an enhanced risk as we get closer to this event tomorrow. We'll have to wait and see. And then chances for severe weather have started to drop off some as we get into Monday and Tuesday, but heavy rain will be a threat as well. You can see this upcoming week could be very wet across Arkansas, across the Mississippi River Valley, and the Pacific Northwest. The interior West, though, is going to be hot and it's going to be dry. As we head into the following week, we'll see that wetness shifting eastward. A very wet week expected later this upcoming week into the following over the eastern U.S., drying out, though, over the northern plains. And then you can see tropical activity starting to get more feisty here by the middle of the month of May, according to the seasonal European model. As we get into July, our forecast starts to diverge, and we don't see the confidence level as you would expect. Temperature forecast, it's going to be a cool stretch of weather over the Great Lakes, over eastern and central Canada, with the exception of Atlantic Canada, where it's still warm. Florida's going to stay pretty warm here. But the feature I want to show you is this heat building out west, an early season heat wave that we do need to take seriously across the western United States. That heat is eventually going to expand north and east. Where we see that break between the cool and the hot, we are likely going to see multiple waves of storms. Maybe at some point in here, if we get enough heat buildup in this area, maybe a very active track across the Great Lakes, across the Ohio Valley, into the Mid-Atlantic and Carolinas. So severe weather chances do not go away just because tornado season is winding down. We're going to still see that potential for severe weather, although it will not be as extreme as what we saw last month. And by July 4th, looks like a good chunk of the country is going to be running on the hot side. And I think that's the trend for the summer. A little bit of a late start to summer in the eastern U.S., an early start in the west. But I do think we're going to see a longer than average summer as we head into La Nina. It could end up being one of our top 5 temperature summers in the U.S., but it is probably going to stay hot into September as the tropics remain busy. I thank you all so much for watching today. If you have not become a subscriber, I recommend that you do. My goal here is to get on YouTube more often in June. May was extremely busy for me, but now that the tropics are going to be a topic, I am going to plan to be on here much more frequently. So I appreciate y'all's time today. I give all the glory to God. I thank him for putting me on this earth and for the love that he has shown me and many others. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And the grace of God is what drives me to do what I do every day, knowing that he's given his Son to die on the cross so that I could live eternally, so that those who have chosen to believe in his miracles, that our sins will be washed away, and eternally we can live with him forever. And that brings me peace. And I pray that it brings you peace as well. I hope you all have a great Saturday, and I look forward to getting back on with you guys here soon. Make it a good one. See you soon.